Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Encounters Shattered Wastes. Encounters is a 1 to 4 player game in which you are trying to take down a variety of bosses, playing as a variable number of characters, and trying to basically slowly take them down to their reverse weakened form before they eventually take you out of the game. This is a prototype, all rules, components, everything you see here, subject to change, and it's worth noting as well that these beautiful acrylic standees that I will definitely be talking about more in this video, these are part of the deluxe edition of the game, so factor that in. There are a bunch of cardboard standees that you have instead, but just make sure to take that into account as you look at this. Now, past that, this is a crowdfunding campaign. I'll have a link to the campaign down below in the description, and this, like I said already, is a 1 to 4 player game. You're going to be taking control of a variable number of characters, and you're going to start the game by building out those characters. Every character has a little bit of stats in the bottom as far as the 8 cards that you're going to be pulling from a common pool of abilities, and then choosing from those 8 cards 3 of those 8 abilities to build out your character. Now, every character has a different distribution. One character is focusing more on defense, one more on magic, one more on items, one more on attack, and they have a different distribution of the cards you're taking, but ultimately how you build them is up to you. So when you're building a character, you might draw more defense cards than attack cards, but if the attack cards work for your build, you might end up going with a slightly heavier attack build. So the game gives you freedom to choose while also still having characters feel a certain way, and also, in addition to the various abilities you're going to be adding to your character, you also have an ingrained ability on that character as well. So there's both character differences, variability, asymmetry to the game, while also giving you a common pool of abilities to make sure your character feels different every time you dive into the same game. Once you've done that, once you've picked your 3 abilities, over here I have 2 magic and 1 attack, over here I chose 2 attack, 1 defense, 5 magic, and 0 items, and then I built them out accordingly, trying to combine their abilities with my own ability and with the abilities of the people on my team. Once you've built that out, you're going to go through the process of picking a boss, and you're going to start taking down that boss. So, right now we have the Harvester in play. The bosses come in a variety of difficulties, giving you both variability as well as difficulty scaling if you are having a harder time in the game. You're going to take the boss, and you're going to start the process of having them going through the phases of the turn where you refresh, dealing out various attacks that will be hitting you, then go into the phase where you take your various actions, trying to stop the game from hurting you that much, and finally the defend phase where everything is going to resolve based on how you dealt with the first phases. So again, effectively, like any cooperative game, this is going to have, and I may not have mentioned it's a cooperative game, this is a cooperative game, but in which case you're going to have the general idea of you trying to take down the bad stuff faster than the bad stuff is happening to you. Every turn bad things are happening, every turn potential future attacks are being dealt, you have to deal with them, and then they're resolved, and hopefully you are able to deal with everything coming your way better than the game is throwing it your way. To that end, the first thing you're going to do every single turn is you're going to refill these lines. Wherever there's a character but no card, you're going to put down a card. The game starts with a card in every column. But wherever there's a character and no card, you're going to put down a card. And then every character is going to roll a number of dice equal to the stat on the boss, which varies. Right now, this is a higher one with 3 dice per character. So we're going to roll 3 dice over here, and we're going to go ahead and fill. We should probably do this one at a time, but we're going to fill these over here. Actually, I don't know if it matters one at a time. We're just going to go ahead and fill these. So over here in column 1, we're going to put another attack. In column 4, we're going to put 2 more attacks. That's for the first character, and we're going to repeat that for every character in the game, so another few are going to happen. 6s mean they don't spawn, so right now we're going to spawn a 1 and a 2, but not 6s. So these are all potential attacks that are going to be headed your way. Now the attack build of this deck is going to be variable based on the boss you're fighting against. You're going to build out the bottom here, giving 4 of the melee attacks and 1 magic attack for each character you're fighting against. So this boss's deck is made up of 10 cards, 8 melee, and 2 magic that are going to be thrown over here, plus the initial starting melee cards that start off there. From there, you move into the action phase. Now you'll notice this token is on the blue side as opposed to the red side, which basically means we can't actually hurt him right now. All we can do is slowly fatigue him until he gets to the point where he eventually breaks, at which point we can hurt him. So there's a bit of a timing system in play here, where first of all, whenever you attack cards, you're going to add them to the fatigue deck first, and then only once he runs out of cards in the stamina deck will he break, at which point future attacks go to his wounds, slowly depleting his deck. And then again, he'll refresh himself. After the phase, he'll go ahead and defend himself, he's starting all prepped again. And every cycle of that will be a little easier because there's going to be fewer and fewer cards in his deck every time you add cards to the wounds. Going to that, we go to the action phase where our characters are going to take 2 actions each. Now you can't take the same ability action twice, and so they're going to try to figure out how to take different actions to be able to slowly take down these cards, because there's a system of how these cards trigger and attack us. To that end, the main actions you can take are you can move around the board, moving 1, 2, or 3. You can move diagonally, so 1, or you can move 3 characters or diagonally. So 1, 2, 3 over here, popping 3 characters over there. So you have the opportunity to move around the board to start dealing with the cards. Then additionally, you can use your various attack actions or your basic attack. Characters are going to have stats on them. This is how many dice you roll for basic attack, how many cards you deal damage to, and that's your crit number, which is very relevant for a lot of things in the game because crits are pretty awesome in, well, a lot of ways. To that end, let's go ahead and do a basic attack. Let's see what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're doing our playing as the Aeromancer. So let's do a basic attack. Let's start with staying over here in the front line, and we're going to do a move action, 1, 2, 3, heading into the back line over there. And then when you use an ability attack, if you're on the back line, the damage dealt goes to wounds, gain a threat for every damage dealt as normal. If you're in the front line, reduce your threat by the value rolled before dealing damage. So those things don't make a ton of sense to you right now, but right now we are in the back line, and so what we're going to do is we're going to use an ability attack, except this ability attack won't actually help us, so we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to go do a basic frontline attack. So let's stick with the, we're not going to use our ability. We didn't build the Aeromancer out very well, unfortunately. Let's go ahead and roll 1 die. Let's do blood magic. We're going to choose that number of cards in an area and place them into wounds. Reduce your HP by the value roll. This is going to be a fun one over here. We're using blood magic, so we're going to roll this die over here, and 4. So we rolled 1 die. Choose that number of cards in an area, that's going to be all these 3, and put them directly into wounds. That is a very cool ability. The only problem is twofold. First thing is, we're then going to take damage equal to that roll, so we go down from 7 health to 3, which is not great for someone who's not starting off well to begin with. And then we also have to cycle this card. Some cards have the opportunity to potentially cycle, or you must cycle. In this case, you must cycle it, which means it's a one-time use card. Some cards are too powerful to stick around your play area forever, and now we have a new attack over here, which will be very helpful for our Aeromancer ability. That's going to be that action. We clear that row out. From there, we're going to go to the Siren. The Siren is going to also try to take an action. When you attack, you may target an adjacent area. Now, right now, we're trying to be mindful of the threat value going on here. You can see over here, this character does not like having a threat value of more than 6. So this area won't trigger, this area won't trigger, and we'll explain that more in the defend phase. These 2 areas are currently going to trigger. So right about now, we do want to take down the card in that area. We could do a few things. Oh wow, we have Glacial Blade, which is also pretty cool. But we're not going to do that one right now. Instead, we're going to go ahead and do a basic attack. When you attack, you may target an adjacent area, but I don't think we're going to. I think we're going to go ahead and just attack the core area we're in, which means we're going to, that's it. We're going to go ahead and do attack action in this area. We're going to roll 1 die and deal 1 damage to a card if we succeed. Now, the number we have to hit when we attack is it has to be higher than or equal to our threat value. The way that works is right now that roll was guaranteed to be higher or equal to, although it still mattered for rolling it because of criticals. But so what we're going to do now is we're going to take this card, we're going to add it to fatigue, which again isn't actually a wound yet. We're not depleting his deck, we're just slowly weakening him so we could hit him again. And then we're going to increase our threat by 3 because that's the stat on the card, which means the next time we attack, we have to roll a 3 or higher, which might make it a little harder. In this case, we're actually not going to bother attacking this again, but we will attack this one because of the ability over here. When you attack, you may target an adjacent area. So we'll do a second attack on this one. This time we have to roll a 3 or higher, and we got a 1, so this time we unfortunately missed on that attack. That can happen in the game. That's the basic idea of the game. You're going to be moving, taking attack actions, taking special actions on your cards, and the last one is recovering. When you do a recover action, you have the opportunity to get rid of these annoying little cards over here, or to restore your mana, or alternatively to get rid of fatigue. You'll notice I did not say anything about health. Your health cannot be restored without the use of abilities or items or things like that. In general, you cannot simply heal in this game. You need something that will heal you. Now that we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and resolve the enemy row. The way that works is you're going to go ahead top to bottom, and if an area is empty, you're going to draw one of the enemy's cards and play it to that area. So you want to be mindful of empty areas might sound good, but in reality it just means the enemy is going to hit you a little harder. You kind of want to manage how empty things are or aren't. So right now we're going to go ahead and resolve this card. Characters in even front lines are going to take one of these cards over here, and then 2 threat and 1 wound. So boom, that's not great over there. We're going to 1 wound her here, 2 threat higher, and she has one of these cards. This card is going to say, after using an ability, gain threat equal to its MP cost. Not great. We're going to put this underneath his deck, and this is important because his deck only has 5 cards, and that's specific to this character, and the order that those cards come out will allow you to plan around it, because right now we know that in 4 turns from now, when he does that again, or when he activates those cards again, and characters in the front line are going to be hit. So there's a degree of memorizing the pattern of a boss so that you can ignore what they're doing a little more effectively. Sometimes you can't always ignore it. Sometimes you can just mitigate how bad it is. From there, we're going to go here. This area has a 4 over here, which means it's not going to trigger because it's below the 6. So we need to be mindful of that. This area over here is a 3. Again, won't trigger. This area is above this area. Oh, I apologize. I did it wrong. If there's a character in an area, you do trigger 1 card there regardless of the threat value. So we're going to trigger this, which deals 3 more damage to her. Again, not going great. And this goes to fatigue. And over here, this will not trigger because it's lower than the threat value. Over here, we have higher than threat value, which means not only will reveal a card, but it's going to hit all players. Wow, that's brutal. This symbol won't matter until a character shatters, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will shortly. But we have 3 of these cards over here. We're going to be taking a whole bunch of recover actions next turn, and this affects all characters. For the record, this is a brutal start to the game. It's a good thing we're not actually playing. From there, we're going to go to this next area, which will not trigger because it's below the threat value, and that's the basic idea of what happens there, although I did something incorrectly, because this character actually has an ability that when the threat value exceeds an area, we actually draw one of his cards. So strictly speaking, these would not be in play right now. And then instead, we'd be doing this ability. Characters in odd frontline areas are going to take 4 damage, and that one actually doesn't hit us at all because we have no one in a frontline area that is currently odd. So that's totally fine, but now we know it's going to be even frontline, followed by odd frontline, and we're going to start memorizing that pattern. From there, that's in the defend phase, by the way. From there, we're going to go to the refresh phase, where we'll start again dealing out cards. That's the basic pattern as far as things go, although there's a bunch more to talk about. Once again, a quick reminder, you're going to be dealing out cards. Every area with the character is going to get a card, and then after that, character is going to roll dice and add cards based on the villain's attack stat. From there, you're going to go ahead and take your actions, 2 actions per character, moving, using abilities, refreshing, and recovering, trying to combo things as efficiently as possible to take down and manage the various cards in the areas before they trigger against you. You're trying to think through what's the boss's threat stat, and how are you going to be mindful of that? How are you going to make sure that weaker cards hit you, but stronger cards don't? Which characters are they going to hit? Make sure they don't hit all the characters. Lots of things like that you try to balance. Ultimately, the game is going to be throwing bad things at you. You cannot stop that. What you can do is you can plan and mitigate around how those things hit you, so you can end up winning the game by not being damaged as much as the boss is damaged. And then lastly, you're going to repeat that cycle going again and again and again. Now, a few things we haven't heavily talked about. First of all, is when you eventually reduces the boss's wounds, when the boss eventually has a bunch of cards in fatigue over here, and it deals out its last cards over here, it's going to deal out cards on that refresh phase. Any further cards it deals will come from its fatigue, but the boss will shatter. Now you have the opportunity to actually deal wounds to the boss, and this turn, any wounds you deal will go directly to wounds. No matter what you deal, any attacks will go to wounds, weakening the boss permanently, which means when the boss recovers again, he'll take everything from his fatigue, and only from his fatigue, and start the process again, refreshing at the end of the phase. So whenever it depletes its stamina, you're going to start dealing damage to wounds. That's going to be how you take the boss out. When the boss eventually does have all its wounds into stamina, the point when a boss would draw a card from stamina and there's nothing in stamina or fatigue is the point at which the boss shatters. You'll take the boss, you will place the boss with the alternative miniature, you'll flip the cards over to the other side over here, this card, you'll do some minor modifications to some of the stats over here, and then you'll also, meaning you'll slightly adjust their deck potentially in different ways, and then you'll replace them with their new deck of cards, which one you have to memorize a new sequence of cards that are going to be hitting you in an entirely different fashion. Once you take out that boss completely, putting every single card into its wounds from everywhere on the battlefield, that's when you win the game. Along the game, a few other things can happen. You can shatter in the game, meaning the same way the boss powers up and goes to a different level, you as characters can also power up and go to a different level, either because you died and you want to shatter and go into your last form, or sometimes as a voluntary action you want to shatter to be able to get certain things done in certain timing patterns. When you shatter, you're going to take your character, you're going to flip them to the reverse side, you will place their standee with their shattered standee. You're going to swap this board to its shattered side, where it's going to have slightly different things you need to be mindful of. You'll again reset your HP. You'll set this track over here. It represents a kind of same idea to magic, but now instead of magic, it's a counting up track. When this hits 10, you're going to die. This is the last opportunity. When your health goes down, or when this hits 10, you die. It's not a question. It's not an option. You simply will. And additionally, you lose these cards, and instead you're going to draw a certain number of cards, in this case 3, from the Shatter deck, giving you new abilities that you can use, but this time you're paying for them with this, which is your permanent life force and cannot be repaired, or in minimal cases at least can be repaired. You're going to have these more powerful abilities, you'll have a new ability yourself, you're going to have new stats, and then you have this last opportunity to go out in a blaze of glory. You will be more powerful, you will deal more damage, you will have cooler turns, you're also going to die pretty quickly, so you need to be mindful about how you pace all that out. And that's basically everything going on in Encounter Shadows Wastes. There might be a few things we didn't touch upon, but for the most part, you have 8 bosses with various level of difficulties and a variety to their playstyles. You have 8 characters, which again, different playstyles, different deck compositions, different ways you'll build up the characters, and the general goal is you're trying to take down the boss, eventually move them to their weakened form, take out their weakened form, before they ultimately take you out. You'll have a last opportunity to go out in a blaze of glory as you shatter, but ultimately it comes down to how you use your abilities, how you combine different characters, and the different ways they do things on the battlefield to win a game of Encountered Shattered Wastes. Which brings me to my review, starting off with the fact of ease of play, reminder, prototype, all those things. Ease of play, for the most part, pretty easy. For the most part. The only caveat there is the game does have a lot of sequencing and rules to how you manage things, enough so that I would say it probably wasn't until my 3rd play that I felt confident enough that I was getting things 98% right as I went through it. Lots of stuff as far as, okay, great, when this happens, that happens, depending on the situation, that card will hit this character's, and then every boss adds their own rules adjustments. It's not the most complicated, not by a long shot, but it probably took me my 3rd play before I started to feel more confident that I was playing correctly, as opposed to constantly checking the rulebook. So I don't think it was hard to learn, but there is a lot of sequencing. A good player aid might really help with that. This is definitely the prototype phase, so we might see that. I don't know. The rulebook is clear. It's just a lot of stuff to actually go through and memorize as you go through the game. As far as game time, it does vary based on the boss you're playing and how many characters you're playing at. I would say generally in the 90-minute range, although that can definitely vary. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with the general variability of everything happening here. You have these bosses, and the bosses are all very different in their play. I shouldn't say all. I have not played against all the bosses yet. The bosses I have played as are all very different in their actual playstyle. They feel different. They have different abilities. They have different ways that they approach the game. Some are more aggressive. Some are a little bit more laid back. Some are more focused on magic. Some more melee. Their cards and the deck composition. The deck composition doesn't matter that much. It matters if you tilt heavily towards magic or melee. But past that, the way the enemies approach the game with their slight rule adjustment and their own cards that hit the engine does make them feel surprisingly different for how little actually is technically changing from each boss to each boss. But it does work and it does feel different. And then there's shattered mode. The boss is having a 2 mode where they're weakened and suddenly change. They're not really weakened, they're just different form, and sometimes they're punching you harder. The boss variability is a lot of fun, and the fact that it has difficulty scaling baked in also means that if you're having too easy a time, you can start leveling up, and if you're having too hard a time, you can start leveling down. You can kind of pick the boss around where you currently are with the game, which is a pro and a con, but we'll get to that later. There's also hero variability. With 8 heroes, even if you use the full complement of 4 heroes, you have a minimum of 2 games before you even see the heroes, and then of course a ton of games before you see, the various ways the heroes can team up, and of course the variability of the deck composition. The fact that you build your heroes out differently every single game means you always have the opportunity to play the exact same team of heroes and still have a very, very different engine. Don't get me wrong, I definitely want more heroes, but there's a lot of variability between the bosses, between the heroes, between the deck composition. Everything feels meaningfully different in the game, and the hero build gives you that additional taste and flavor as far as what you're going to try to do and how you're going to combine different characters, different abilities, all into one package of your approach to the game this time you're playing it. Finding those combos and leveraging the ways you manage the battlefield, leveraging the way you try to think through, well, things are being thrown at me, that's not the question, but how can I minimize the pain? How can I minimize the hurt? How can I outlast the boss and do more damage to him? There's a lot of figuring out to do in this game, and the whole puzzle over here is intensely rewarding as you go through that. Breaking the boss's guard, learning their attack patterns. That's very fun. When you have a game where the boss is hitting you with their attack cards, when you time it so that they continue to hit and whiff on their attack cards, which depending on the boss you can do. Depending on the boss, you have the flexibility to be able to dance, to dodge, to weave, if you know what's coming. So there's a degree of memorization which you may not love in the game, but it's only 5 cards, and if you can predict those patterns, it is very rewarding to actually go through that. It's a lot of fun. And then of course the decision of when to shatter, or even the shattering at all. I like games with escalation. And in Encounter Shattered Wastes, the bosses escalate by getting more powerful as they weaken, and then you escalate by going into a shattered last final approach where you will die soon, but you have an opportunity to do a lot before you die and to feel cooler and powerful. There are games where some characters don't shatter, and those characters, I feel like they didn't get to see that final cool burst of glory, and so shattering is a lot of fun, but it comes with the pressure and the timer in the game. This game gives you escalation on both sides, which I really enjoy. And then lastly, there's the acrylic miniatures over here, the acrylic standees, which is a ton. I'm not going to show you everything here, but just a ton of just beautiful acrylic standees with their different forms over here, so you can see the 2 different forms of, that particular character over here. We have these are really, really cool. I don't know if final production will look like. This is a prototype, but they are very cool, and that extends as well to the heroes, where we just have a handful of just acrylic standees for the heroes, just tons of cool character art, nicely printed on those. They really enhance the gameplay. I play this game both with the regular cardboard standees, as well as the acrylic standees, it plays great both ways, make no mistake, but the acrylic standees are a very nice touch. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, I mentioned the difficulty scaling in the bosses, and I like that aspect of having difficulty scaling. I don't love it when a game attaches difficulty scaling to the types of content you have, because effectively that means that if I get better at the game, I'm kind of making it so that, you know, half the bosses might not be fun for me to play against anymore. I wish difficulty scaling were introduced into the game in a way that still made all bosses fun to play against, as opposed to feeling like this boss is a cakewalk, and so I appreciate that they add their own flavor and unique approach to the game, but also I win and don't feel challenged, so I'm not going to play against them. I like the difficulty scaling. I wish it weren't necessarily attached to the bosses inherently. That's not necessarily a problem. With 8 bosses, there's still plenty of content, plenty of variability, but now it makes it so that I want more bosses and or difficulty scaling for lower bosses so I can slightly mix up and make it a bit harder for me to engage with those bosses. Secondly, I'll say sometimes the cards you draw just don't allow for good combos. Despite drawing 8 cards when you build a character, sometimes you just don't find cards that combo well with either your power or other characters' powers, and so it just feels a little less satisfying to build out that character. I have made some really incredibly powerful combos where I feel the character's ability and the cards that I use together really work well, and sometimes they don't, and so there is that trade-off there. I'll also say I'm not a fan of the mechanic in which you bury a card, which you cycle a card. Sometimes you have powerful abilities, like you saw already with that, you know, with that ability we had where we just did blood magic, which is a really cool ability. And so I get the need for burying it under the deck so I don't keep using it, but that does mean that sometimes you're often drawing cards that are random, that you didn't have agency with. And because of the nature of how these all work together, it does mean that that mechanic where you must bury a card, I almost wish there was, like, you know, draw 3 more and replace one, which might be too powerful. Balancing is a different conversation, but getting random cards in a game where I spent a lot of time thinking through how I want to construct my deck out, that isn't the most satisfying concept. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, the memory nature of things. Attacking a boss, if you do memorize their cards, it will make it easier. That is a factor. It doesn't bother me because it's only 5 cards, and so it does feel like there's just enough memory to feel like a challenge without so much to feel like a memory game. I feel clever when I anticipate stuff, and I feel like, oh, I should have remembered that was coming when I didn't. But that isn't an element of memory, and if you don't like elements of memory, it definitely has that. Additionally, I mentioned the rules being a little hard to follow at first. The first few games are going to have a lot of small mistakes you make as you memorize how the game plays. Not a big deal, but it's a slight barrier to entry. And additionally, I'll say it thrives at 1 to 2 players, in my opinion. This is the kind of game you might like playing at 3 and 4. For me, this is the kind of game I'm really only going to play this at 1 to 2. I'll play the full complement of 4 characters, but I'll play it as a 1 to 2 player experience. And lastly, the lack of healing in the game. While the lack of healing to me is a timer on the game, it's a timer on your necessity to get the job done, to manage everything, and to manage what the boss is throwing at you as you throw things back at it. The fact that you don't heal in the game could be frustrating. If you like playing it fast and loose and getting a little hit a little more often and just usually rely on healing, you can't do that in this game. This game is about minimizing the hits on you because there's not a lot of healing. You need to be mindful of that, and if that doesn't sound like your jam, well, this might not be your jam. As far as final thoughts on Encountered Shattered Wastes, I really like this game. A lot. It grew on me a lot as I continued to play it, as I saw the variability of the bosses, as I got better at managing what was being thrown at me, as I found more cards and more combos and more abilities. There's a lot to really enjoy here. It does run a little long for the type of experience I typically want in this. It tends to run, again, that 90-minute playtime, and that could vary, but for me, between setup, between building, building my characters alone is often like a 10-15-minute experience as I draw cards, follow the characters, and try to think how I want to build things out. So it can run a little on the long side, but past that, I really enjoy the game. I want more heroes. I love the overall engine. Bosses, I don't necessarily need more yet, but I'm sure I will want more bosses at some point. Overall, it gives you a fun, challenging puzzle as you try to think through how to build out your combos, how to approach the engine, how to make sure everything hitting you is hitting you as little as possible, or alternatively whiffing entirely. It gives you opportunities to feel clever, and I very much enjoy that. For now, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, and I will say I don't see that going lower, and I do see the possibility of that going higher as I dive into it more and as I appreciate the engine more. But for right now, a 4 out of 5. I really like Encountered Shattered Wastes. As far as other game recommendations, I'm actually going to give 3, and they're all going to break my usual goal. Usually when I give recommendations, I try to avoid games that don't currently exist at the time of filming because, well, they don't currently exist at the time of filming. But in this case, I'm actually going to give 3 recommendations as opposed to 2, and they're all games that don't currently exist, although they are all games that you have the opportunity to back, to late pledge, or all of that. But they're going to be Slay the Spire, the board game. This gives you very similar vibes as you puzzle out how to approach the engine. Very solid game. We also have Hellbringer, which is a little less popular game, a little less well known. I believe coming to crowdfunding either shortly or whatnot, but another game that that gives you a kind of puzzle as far as diving into trying to take down a boss slowly but surely as you build up your character and try to manage what's happening in the game. And then lastly, Elden Ring, the board game from Steamforged Games, gave me a very similar puzzly vibe as you try to make sure that the things hitting you are hitting you as minimally as possible. All three of these games give me a different puzzle of taking down something and trying to minimize the hurt being done to me along the way so I can ultimately win the game. In any case, and until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.